What is good, all my little spirits? I hope that you're having an awesome day, afternoon, evening, night, morning, whatever time it is for you guys. For today's video, I want to talk about a subject that's kind of faded from the media in terms of coverage just because not much has come out in terms of information about it, but there's still been a lot of discourse over it, and I just want to address the situation and give my thoughts. So, for those of you who may remember or who are not familiar with this, back in May of this year, 2021, we got an announcement from SM Entertainment that they'll be partnering with MGM Worldwide Television Group, who's known for producing shows like The Voice and Survivor. In this collaboration, what they're going to do is create a new faction of the group that's already existing called NCT, and it's going to be labeled NCT Hollywood. First of all, I think that is by far one of the lamest, corniest, dumbest names I've ever heard in my entire life for K-pop groups. And that's saying a lot given some of the names given to the Girls Planet 999 groups, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I think something like NCTE for English, NCTA for America, that might work better, or just like how NCT has a China-specific group being Wavy, they could go down that route and not include NCT in the name. It could also just be that NCT Hollywood is going to be the name of the program itself, and then the group is going to actually have a name that differs from the program. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But essentially what's going to happen is 21 contestants that are going to be males between the ages of 13 to 25, assuming that means international age. If you are not aware, in South Korea, you essentially are considered to be 1 year old already when you're born. So if they were using Korean ages, that would mean people who are 12 to 24, and I don't know if SM is going to be willing to have 12-year-olds competing on a reality show like this. I think even though 13 is still really young, it's at least better than someone who's not even a teenager. But I digress. So yeah, 21, 13 to 25-year-old men are going to be sent to Seoul, South Korea for essentially a boot camp survival show type of environment. By boot camp, I'm sure what's going to happen is it's going to be like idol training, but with twists, challenges, eliminations, etc. And that's one of the first things that we don't know about, and that's why I put off making this video. So a lot of the issues surrounding this group is the lack of information. In May, we got the announcement, and I think it was in either June or July that we got SM Congress for 2021, where they repeated the concept of the show, but they didn't actually give any further information aside from reiterating that the current members of NCT, which there are 23 of right now, are going to act as mentors to the trainees or contestants, whatever you want to call them. And everyone was speculating and theorizing about what the show was going to be like, what was going to happen, and I figured, let's just wait, see what other information comes out. And I waited, and waited, and waited, and we got nothing. So yeah, basically at this point, it's just all up for speculation. But one thing that I'm theorizing that I am willing to bet I'm right on is that not all 21 members are going to debut in this new subunit of NCT. Again, there's already 23 people in the group. I don't think SM is going to basically double the amount of NCT members by having all 21 contestants in the show and then debuting the group. Again, MGM is known for The Voice and Survivor, which are both competition shows in which people get eliminated until there's either one winner or potentially, in this case, because it is going to form a group, a number of winners. So that's the first thing that a lot of people are concerned about is just, are there going to be 21 people debuting in NCT? And I really don't think so. I think a more realistic number is probably going to be about 7. Maybe more, maybe less, but I'm thinking 7 is a good number to go off of. And that brings me to my second point that a lot of people are concerned about, and that's the composition of the group. There have been a lot of memes, a lot of hatred, and a lot of genuine concern as to what the members of the group are going to look like. Some of which has been very valid, such as saying, at the end of the day, this is a K-pop group, and K-pop is a great opportunity for not only just Koreans, but Asians in general, as we've seen Chinese, Japanese, Taiwanese, Thai, etc. People from a variety of mostly Eastern Asian backgrounds in K-pop. So it's a great opportunity for representation, especially in the entertainment industry, where they're often underrepresented. So when people bring up the question of, will this group only contain, or will the majority of the members be of that descent, that's a fair question. When people say things like, oh, if the group is just a bunch of white people, I'm going to kill myself, well, that's not really being productive now, is it? And then that begs the question, like, are you okay with if it was all just a bunch of black people, if they were all Latinx, Middle Eastern, Polynesian, Native American, etc., etc.? Like, are we only going to have one standard for one race? And that's one of the things that's been concerning me a little bit, is how much the hatred is directed towards this one group. Although, given the demographic, we'll say, of people that Korea boos, who are individuals that basically identify as being Korean, they give up whatever their original nationality and ethnic backgrounds are, and they consider themselves to be from Korea. You may or may not know some of them. I'm not going to mention any because they don't deserve the attention, and the most prominent of them is obviously a cloud chaser, but continuing. So yeah, I definitely see the genuine and valid concern that if the group is made up of just white people, that they're going to be of this... There's no real nice way to say this, but they're going to be Korea boos. So I just wanted to bring to the attention a couple of things that I think are genuine points to sort of counter the argument that every single person's going to be white in this group. For one, we've seen that SM Entertainment hasn't had the greatest reputation when it comes to treating non-Korean idols, including, but not limited to, their Asian idols, such as former members Luhan, Tao, and Chris of EXO, and also, we don't know, but potentially Ningning of aespa may also be experiencing worse treatment than her Korean counterparts. We don't know that. That's only up for speculation right now, but again, we've seen that SM hasn't always been as fair towards non-Koreans as their Korean members. And then we also need to remember that In looking for contestants in America, K-pop isn't as mainstream as a lot of people think it is. Right now on the Billboard Hot 100, which is usually the best indicator in my opinion, not always the most accurate, but the best in terms of what's really popular. And as of right now, there have only been 3 groups as of recent that have been charting, and those have been BTS and Blackpink consistently, as well as twice recently with their song The Feels. I have a totally separate video on that as well, which hopefully I'll get up sooner than later. But yeah, so there isn't as much of a presence of K-pop in the US and Western markets, respectively, and overall, as some people might think. Therefore, auditions like this might not even be on the radar of non-K-pop fans, i.e., people who would just be doing this for clout, that aren't of Asian descent, that maybe have grown up around K-pop or got into the genre a lot sooner than around between 2017 and 2019, when I'd say a majority of newer K-pop fans, myself included, really got invested into the genre. So not only is there the fact that K-pop isn't as prevalent as people might think it is, we do have K-pop idols who are or formerly were under SM Entertainment that came from the United States or North America in general. We have Johnny, who is from Chicago, Illinois, and we have Mark, who's from Vancouver, Canada. We've also had some other idols like the Jung sisters, Jessica and Crystal, who I believe are from California, as well as Tiffany. Jessica and Tiffany were in Girls' Generation, or Tiffany still is. And then Crystal is in FX. And I think even Amber who's also another FX member, was also from the US, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not the first. And then going back to Canada, Red Velvet's Wendy spent a lot of time there, and she actually auditioned for SM while she was living in Canada. So Asian Americans, in terms of just being of Asian descent and living in any American country, whether that's North, South, or Central America, not the most unheard of thing. So yeah, I really want to put to rest this notion that it's only going to be a bunch of non-Asian and specifically white contestants competing on the show to form this group, because I feel like SM isn't dumb enough to do that, and they realize just how much of a disaster that would be. And I believe we have had a fully white K-pop group. I don't remember their name to save my life, and yeah, their career was very short-lived. But speaking of K-pop groups with members who aren't of Korean descent, we do have the group RIAA from DR Music, which now goes by Black Swan. In the group's history, they have had 2 black members. The first one, while it was under the name of RIAA, was Alex, and then after they rebranded the group to Black Swan, they included the member Fatu. Alex had left at this point, so right now it's only a 4-member group, with Fatu being one of them. I believe she's actually both the main rapper and the main dancer. And then the rest of the group pretty much comprises of 3 people of Asian descent, with one exception being Leah, I believe. And she is half Brazilian, if I'm not mistaken. So there can be these combinations of people who are half of one ethnic or racial background and half of a different one. But what I think makes Black Swan work really well is there's still that majority of Asian representation in the group. It's not just a majority of people are non-Asian, then you have like 1 or 2 random people of Asian descent thrown in there. And I think if NCT Hollywood wants to debut, they're going to need to have a similar type of a ratio to this, and here is what I think would be the ideal composition for the group. Let's say that there are 7 members, hypothetically. We don't know that for sure. There could be 5, 6, 9. Maybe SM debuts all 21. We don't know. But I'm going with 7 because I just think that's a safe number to go with. I think if we have 7 members in this group, 3 of them should be of Korean descent. They can be mixed in any way. They could be mixed ethnic backgrounds with other Asian ones, so Korean Chinese, Korean Japanese, etc. They could be half Korean, half Caucasian, half Korean, half black, etc. But 3 members have to have Korean in their ethnic background. The next 2 members still have to be Asian to some degree. So again, they can be Chinese, Vietnamese, Taiwanese, Thai, Japanese, Malaysian, you name it. And doesn't even have to be Eastern or Southeastern Asian. I think that will resonate with the public more, but you could also go more into areas like Mongolia, Bangladesh, Burma or Myanmar, India, etc. So you have your options for ethnic backgrounds. But yeah, the first 5 members of the group should be of some sort of Asian descent, 3 of them predominantly being Korean. Just because, again, at the end of the day, this is a K-pop group, and when it comes to K-pop, as you've seen, a lot of groups have done things that are perceived in the West as being cancelable, whether it's using inappropriate language, whether it's cultural appropriation, whether it's, I don't know, something else, saying something that's considered more conservative. And we do have to remember that South Korea is a much more conservative country than the United States is. So as much as these companies really benefit from the international popularity that K-pop has been receiving, there's still the fact that at the end of the day, as long as they keep the Korean population happy, they're good. Like, things that will get groups canceled in the West, a lot of them are just brushed under the rug by the Korean public. They don't care because it is such a homogenous country with a very sort of universal belief system. And yeah, there's not as much diversity in terms of just backgrounds, thinking, ideologies, etc. And therefore, as long as you conform to what's considered appropriate in South Korea, you're good. So, again, because this is a K-pop group, at the end of the day, they need to make sure that's marketable to the South Korean audience while still being able to be marketed to the Western audience. And I think what they're going to do with this group is, because they're all coming from the US, the members, contestants, whatever you want to call them, they're all going to speak English. And it's so much easier to form a bond with a group or really become a stan or fan of a group if there's not a language barrier. And I think we've been seeing this a lot recently with 4th generation groups, predominantly ones like aespa, ITZY, Stray Kids, Idol, etc., where a number of the members actually speak English to a, what's the word I want used to describe this? Basically a satisfactory level where they're competent in the language, they can understand it when someone's speaking to them, and they can have at least a basic conversation. They're not going to know any SAT terms, which most native English speakers don't anyways, but I'm noticing more so in the fourth generation compared to previous ones that they or at least their companies are putting more of an emphasis on having the members of the group knowing English to communicate with their fans better. So yeah, that's where I think a lot of where this group's going to resonate with the Western market's going to come from. It's just that the members are from the US and it's that they speak a common language with the Western market. Again, usually being like the US, Canada, Europe, which a lot of people are bilingual and speak both English and another language depending on what country and region they're from. So we mentioned 5 members, and then the last 2 are the wild cards. These are the ones that could be of any race, in my opinion, and I actually think it would be better for the group if they were of non-Asian descent, just because, unfortunately, like I mentioned, K-pop isn't as prevalent as some people think it is in the West, and it's still not normalized. If you look at Billboard's articles about NCT Hollywood, they all keep saying, is this going to be the new BTS, the new TXT, the new NCT? Like, no, this isn't the new NCT. This is a part of the still original NCT, and nobody's coming to replace BTS. But because the Western market is so narrow-minded, they can't comprehend the idea of having multiple boy bands and girl groups in the market and thriving at the same time. Just look at when One Direction and Fifth Harmony were as popular as they were. Groups like 5 Seconds of Summer, Ciencio, Pretty Much, Why Don't We, Little Mix, Boys World, etc. They struggled to really carve out a spot in the market for themselves. Fortunately, ones like Ciencio and Little Mix were able to target more respective demographics, Ciencio being more of the Latin pop market and Little Mix being the UK market and Europe in general, but still. I think that the more that, at least especially the American public, sees non-Asian people in K-pop, again, not making up the majority of the group, but just being present in a small percentile, it'll help normalize it because they won't just see K-pop as this Asian craze or something. I live in a very conservative household, and I'm not going to repeat the things that I have heard, but unfortunately, because I love K-pop so much and I play it a lot, a number of my relatives have used some pretty derogatory phrases against just the genre and Asian people in general. And I think that speaks volumes to how K-pop is seen across this country. Keep in mind, I am from one of the most liberal states in the United States, and people still view K-pop this way. Imagine going to a much more conservative state where bigotry is even more prominent. So, again, I think having non-Asian idols, again, just a small percentage of the group, will help to normalize K-pop in general and maybe open people's minds a bit. So what I was thinking might work well is if one of the non-Asian members is of Caucasian descent and one of them is of Black descent. And then honestly, that's not something set in stone. Again, we could have someone that's Latinx, Middle Eastern, Native American, etc. But the reasons why I point out being of white and Black descent specifically is, as we all know, it's no secret that just by being a white person, myself included, we are granted a lot of privileges that are out of our control just based on our skin tone or skin color, whatever you want to say. And It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing that you should be made to feel bad for. It's just something you need to be aware of. So I think having a white member in a group of otherwise a minority population is going to help, because that member might resonate more so with a lot of the more closed-minded people. And the reason why I say a black person might also complement the group really well is because K-pop unfortunately doesn't always have the greatest relationship with the black community, and it is very difficult to be a black K-pop stan because of, again, things like cultural appropriation or racism, or how many times has an idol either mouthed or said the N-word. Like, I can't imagine how exhausting it must be to be a black K-pop stan because of all this stuff that you have to tolerate on a daily basis. But yeah, maybe having someone in the group will help to, one, maybe voice opinions of the black community a little better to SM if they're trying to do something and this person says like, hey, I understand that you think this is cool, but it's actually not going to be perceived well. Fingers crossed they'd actually listen to this member. And then for those people who feel ostracized by K-pop because, again, of this repetitive pattern of just not taking the black K-pop stans' feelings into consideration, having someone there alongside Fatu to look up to and see yourself in K-pop and being incorporated and integrated into the community, I think will help. And then we also have to consider the positions of the members and how that's going to resonate with people in general. Okay, so the positions that I am looking at are the center, the face of the group, the visual, the main vocalist, main dancer, main rapper, the leader, and the magne. When it comes to both the center and the face of the group, again, this is a K-pop group. Both of those positions should be filled by Koreans. Because, again, you want someone that's going to appeal to the Korean public. Worst case scenario, if like many of SM's endeavors to try to break into the Western market fails, they at least have the Korean market to fall back on that will still support this group. And having the face of the group and the center of the group being Korean is going to better solidify the chances of that happening. Whereas if they feel, or not if they feel, whereas if they are of other racial backgrounds, the Korean public might feel a little alienated from the group, or vice versa. The group just might seem like they're not in the right place. As far as the visual of the group goes, this has to be someone of Asian descent. Doesn't necessarily need to be Korean. Like, if we look at groups like Twice, we have Chewie, who I believe is Taiwanese, if I'm not mistaken. She is not Korean. She's still the visual of the group. She still adheres to Korean beauty standards, and she's a beautiful individual. But if the visual of the group is of someone who's not Asian, that really concerns me. Especially if the visual is a white person, because one, a lot of beauty standards around the world are rooted in, I don't want to say whitewashing because I don't think that's the correct term, but Eurocentric beauty standards. And you can see that in Korean culture where having lighter, fairer skin is seen as more appealing, and a lot of other Eurocentric facial features are also seen as more attractive. But for the visual of a group, of a K-pop group, if a white person is more so in line with the Korean beauty standards than a Korean or an Asian individual in general, we really need to rethink what the standards are and where they're coming from. So yeah, the visual of this group absolutely should be someone of Asian American, not Asian, well, yeah, Asian American because they're coming from the US, but of Asian descent. No questions asked. As far as the main vocalists and the main dancers of the group go, I honestly think that could go up to anyone. Like, we have seen that a lot of vocalists just worldwide come from a multitude of backgrounds, and I don't think that you could really specify what racial or ethnic background a vocalist comes from, and same thing with dancer. So both the main and lead vocalist and the main lead dancer, I say they could be any member of the group, they could be of any background. When it comes to the main rapper though, this is where again I feel like we need to be more specific. As I'm sure we have noticed, a lot of hip-hop culture in South Korea does stem from American hip-hop culture. So I think it would be advantageous for the main rapper of the group to actually be black. And part of that comes from, one, they don't need to pretend to be something that they're not. They're actually black. They're not blackfishing, as I believe the correct term is, if I'm not mistaken, if anyone wants to correct me on that. Or talking with, I think it's called a black scent. They can just genuinely be themselves. And on top of this, I keep going back to the same point. K-pop isn't seen as normalized in Western culture as it is in Korean culture. With very few exceptions, if you are a rapper and you are not black in especially the US, you automatically aren't taken very seriously by the industry. Things have changed a little bit, especially with mumble rap being a little more prominent, but overall, I think it's safe to say that the main rapper of this group will be a little more widely accepted in the Western market if they are of black descent. I could be wrong about that, and I am absolutely willing to have an open discussion about if anyone has any sort of thoughts about it, or if they just think that I'm wrong in this sense. But yeah, as far as filling the main rapper position, that's where I think they should go in terms of direction. Lead rapper, again, that could be anyone of any descent. As far as the leader goes, typically it's a little more common for the leader to be the oldest. In this group, I want them to take the BTS approach. The leader needs to be bilingual. I don't care if they grew up in a bilingual household. I don't care if they studied a bunch, or once the show starts, if they just like dive into, assuming they natively speak English, so dive into Korean and really work hard to learn the language. But the leader of this group, who's going to basically be the spokesperson, they need to be fluent in English and Korean by whatever means necessary. So racial and ethnic background doesn't matter to me. They just need to be able to speak both languages in order to help this Korean, especially if they end up, and by they I mean the group, on Korean variety shows, radio shows, talk shows, etc. I don't think SM is going to want to have to delegate a translator to be with this group 24/7 for them to be able to get around Seoul and do all of their tasks, duties, responsibilities, etc. Having a member in the group that can translate is so vital, and the more that they have, the better. So I do think the leader role should just go to someone who's bilingual. And then finally, again, we got the magne of the group. This could honestly be anyone. I really don't have any more thoughts than that when it comes to this. Like, there's nothing really specifically that says, like, this position needs to be filled by someone of this certain background. So yeah, just to recap, because I know that was a very lengthy video, we're going to have NCT Hollywood come from a survival show, which is a combination of SM Entertainment and MGM Worldwide Television Group. There's going to be 21 contestants between the ages of 13 to 25, presumably international ages, being flown to Seoul, South Korea for a boot camp survival type like show. I think that there's going to be about 7 remaining contestants that will actually debut. 3 of them should be Korean, another 2 should be Asian, and the final 2 should be of non-Asian descent. And I'm okay with changing things up, like may 3 Korean, 1 Asian, 3 non-Asian, 2 Korean, 2 Asian, 3 non-Asian. Maybe there'll be more than 7 members of the group. Point is, the majority of the group's representation should be Asian, if that makes any sense. And as far as positions go, the center and face of the group, they have to be Korean. The visual, I absolutely believe they should be Asian. The main rapper, I think the group will benefit a lot if they are of black descent. And then the rest of the positions can honestly be filled up by anyone. So yeah. The only other thing that I have to add to this conversation is one thing that people are upset about is that we're getting this group, but we have yet to see an NCT Japan per se. That's not going to be the group's official name, hopefully, but we still have some members who are only a part of NCT U, which isn't a fixed unit. For reference, NCT has subunits NCT 127, NCT Dream, and Wavy, which all have a fixed member lineup. NCT U, the members can swap in and out depending on the concept and who will better fit the mini album or album. We haven't seen a Wavy type group. Again, Wavy is for the Chinese market specifically. We haven't seen a corresponding group for the Japanese market, which I think the company might be debuting before the end of the year, or if not, very early next year, 2022. And members I think will be included are going to be Yuta, who was born in Osaka, Japan, Shotoru, who was born in Kanagawa, Japan, and then also Ten, even though he was born in Bangkok, Thailand, and is Thai, he can speak Japanese. And then we might see more members being added to the overall NCT lineup who are of Japanese descent for the specific group. So I think we're going to see 2 new groups from NCT in terms of subunits. One being NCT Hollywood, which again, I hope they really change that name. And one being NCT Japan, but we won't know until we get any information. Which again, we have received no information. So yeah, those are just my general thoughts on the group. I hope that's not the disaster I can foresee it possibly being. And a lot of people are already hating on the group without really knowing what it's going to look like. So let's go into this with an open yet apprehensive mindset. So prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. Maybe this group will be amazing. Maybe the lineup will be similar to what I think is fair in terms of what the representation of different backgrounds looks like. And maybe it won't, and maybe it will just be a bunch of white people who think K-pop is basically a bunch of TikTok dances. We don't know. I sure hope that what I just said isn't what happens, but it's a possibility. But yeah, so that's my little rant on NCT Hollywood. Until next time, I hope you guys stay happy, stay healthy, and stay safe. And peace out.